大家好，讀你聽2.0嘅時間，今日繼續讀 A.Christie 嘅 Sparkling Cyanide 去到 Book 2嘅第3節。上一節呢就講到呢個 Faraday 夫婦啦，就係決定應約明知山有虎，偏向虎山行啦。知道 George Barton 呢應該係會設下陷阱噶啦，但係都唔理咁多啦，因為呢兩夫妻咧都叫做初步咧有個共識啦，大家都即係講咗大家心底話啦。而咧呢個 Sandra 咧亦都決定咧係一路都會支持丈夫嘅咁樣。呢一節就睇下有冇介紹其他嘅嫌疑人啦。OK。Halfway across the park, Iris said, "Do you mind if I don't come back with you, George? I feel like a walk. I thought I'd go up over Friars Hill and come down through the wood. I've had an awful headache all day." "My poor child, do go. I won't come with you. I'm expecting a fellow along sometime this afternoon and I'm not quite sure when he'll turn up." "Right. Goodbye till tea time." She turned abruptly and made off at right angles to where a belt of larches showed at the hillside. When she came out on the brow of the hill, she drew a deep breath. It was one of those close, humid days common in October. A dank moisture coated the leaves of the trees and the grey cloud hung low overhead, promising yet more rain shortly. There was not really much more air up here on the hill than there had been in the valley, but Iris felt nevertheless as though she could breathe more freely. She sat down on the trunk of a fallen tree and stared down into the valley to where little Priors nestled demurely in its wooded hollow. Farther to the left, Fairhaven Manor showed a glimpse of rose red on brick. Iris stared out sombrely over the landscape, her chin cupped in her hand. The slight rustle behind her was hardly louder than the drip of the leaves, but she turned her head sharply as the branches parted and Anthony Browne came through them. She cried half angrily, "Tony, why do you always have to arrive like a demon in a pantomime?" Anthony dropped to the ground beside her. He took out his cigarette case, offered her one, and when she shook her head, took one himself and lighted it. Then, inhaling the first puff, he replied, "It's because I'm what the papers call a mystery man. I like appearing from nowhere." "How did you know where I was?" "An excellent pair of bird glasses. I heard you were lunching with the Faradays and spied on you from the hillside when you left. Why don't you come to the house like an ordinary person?" "I'm not an ordinary person," said Anthony in a shocked tone. "I'm very extraordinary." "I think you are." He looked at her quickly. Then he said, "Is anything the matter?" "No, of course not. At least." She paused. Anthony said interrogatively, "At least?" She drew a deep breath. "I'm tired of being down here. I hate it. I want to go back to London." "You're going soon, aren't you?" "Next week." "So this was a farewell party at the Faradays?" "It wasn't a party, just them and one old cousin." "Do you like the Faradays, Iris?" "I don't know. I don't think I do very much. Although I shouldn't say that because they've really been very nice to us." "Do you think they like you?" "No, I don't. I think they hate us." "Interesting. Is it?" "Oh, not the hatred, if true. I meant the use of the word us. My question referred to you personally." "Oh, I see. I think they like me quite well in a negative sort of way. I think it's us as a family living next door that they mind about. We weren't particular friends of theirs. They were Rosemary's friends." "Yes," said Anthony. "As you say, they were Rosemary's friends. Not that I should imagine Sandra Faraday and Rosemary were ever bosom friends, eh?" "No," said Iris. She looked faintly apprehensive, but Anthony smoked peacefully. Presently he said, "Do you know what strikes me most about the Faradays?" "What?" "Just that they are the Faradays. I always think of them like that. Not as Stephen and Sandra, two individuals linked by the state and the established church, but as a definite dual entity, the Faradays. That is rarer than you would think. They are two people with a common aim, a common way of life, identical hopes and fears and beliefs, and the odd part of it is that they are actually very dissimilar in character. Stephen Faraday, I should say, is a man of very wide intellectual scope, extremely sensitive to outside opinion, horribly different about himself and somewhat lacking in moral courage. Sandra, on the other hand, has a narrow medieval mind, is capable of fanatical devotion, and is courageous to the point of recklessness. He always seems to me, said Iris, rather pompous and stupid. He's not at all stupid. He's just one of the usual unhappy successes. Unhappy? Most successes are unhappy. That's why they are successes. They have to reassure themselves about themselves by achieving something that the world will notice. What extraordinary idea you have, Anthony. You find they are quite true if you only examine them. The happy people are failures because they are on such good terms with themselves that they don't give a damn. Like me, they are also usually agreeable to get on with. Again, like me. You have a very good opinion of yourself. I am just drawing attention to my good points in case you may not have noticed them. Iris laughed. Her spirits had risen. The dull depression of fear had lifted from her mind. She glanced down at her watch. Come home and have tea, and give a few more people the benefit of your unusual agreeable society. Anthony shook his head. Not today, I must be getting back. Iris turned sharply on him. Why will you never come to the house? There must be a reason. Anthony shrugged his shoulders. Put it that I'm rather peculiar in my ideas of accepting hospitality. Your brother-in-law doesn't like me. He's made that quite clear. Oh, don't bother about George. If Aunt Lucilla and I ask you, she's an old dear. You'd like her. I'm sure I should, but my objection holds. You used to come in Rosemary's time. That, said Anthony, was rather different. A faint cold hand touched Iris's heart. She said, What made you come down here today? Had your business in this part of the world? Very important business. With you. I came here to ask you a question, Iris. The cold hand vanished. Instead, there came a faint flutter, that throb of excitement that women have known from time immemorial. And with it, Iris's face adopted that same look of blank inquiry that her great-grandmother might have worn prior to saying a few minutes later, Oh, Mr. X, this is so sudden. Yes, she turned that impossibly innocent face towards Anthony. He was looking at her. His eyes were grave, almost stern. Answer me truthfully, Iris. This is my question. Do you trust me? It took her aback. It was not what she had expected. He saw that. You didn't think that was what I was going to say, but it is a very important question, Iris. The most important question in the world to me. I ask again, do you trust me? She hesitated a bare second. Then she answered, her eyes falling. Yes. Then I'll go on and ask you something else. Will you come up to London and marry me without telling anybody about it? She stared. But I couldn't. I simply couldn't. You couldn't marry me? Not in that way. And yet you love me. You do love me, don't you? She heard herself saying, Yes, I love you, Anthony. But you won't come and marry me at the church of St. Elfrida, Bloomsbury, at the parish of which I have resided for some weeks and where I can consequently get married by license at any time. How can I do a thing like that? George would be terribly hurt and Aunt Lucilla would never forgive me. And anyway, I'm not of age. I'm only 18. You'd have to lie about your age. I don't know what penalties I should incur for marrying a minor without her guardian's consent. Who is your guardian, by the way? George. He's my trustee as well. As I was saying, whatever penalties I incurred, they couldn't unmarry us, and that is really all I cared about. Iris shook her head. I couldn't do it. I couldn't be so unkind. And in any case, why? What's the point of it? Anthony said, That's why I asked you first if you could trust me. You'd have to take my reasons on trust. Let's say that it is the simplest way. But never mind. Iris said timidly, If George only got to know you a little better. Come back now with me. It will be only he and Aunt Lucilla. Are you sure? I thought. He paused. As I struck up the hill, I saw a man going up your drive. And the funny thing is that I believe I recognized him as the man he hesitated, had met. Of course, I forgot. George said he was expecting someone. The man I thought I saw was a man called Race, Colonel Race. Very likely, Iris agreed. George does know a Colonel Race. He was coming to dinner on that night when Rosemary... She stopped, her voice quivering. Anthony gripped her hand. Don't go on remembering it, darling. It was beastly, I know. She shook her head. I can't help it, Anthony. Yes? Did it ever occur to you? Did you ever think? She found a difficulty in putting her meaning into words. Did it ever strike you that Rosemary might not have committed suicide? That she might have been killed? Good God, Iris, what put that idea into your head? She did not reply, merely persisted. That idea never occurred to you? Certainly not. Of course Rosemary committed suicide. Iris said nothing. Who's been suggesting these things to you? For a moment, she was tempted to tell him George's incredible story, but she refrained. She said slowly, It was just an idea. Forget it, darling idiot. He pulled her to her feet and kissed her cheek lightly. Darling morbid idiot. Forget Rosemary. Only think of me. 好啦，咁呢一節就係講呢個兩小無猜啦。應該係話一小無猜啦，因為 Rosemary 咧，唔係 sorry 呢個 Iris 咧只係得18歲嘅啫。呢度交代咗啦。咁但係呢個 Anthony Browne 咧就年紀大好多啦噃。不過咧佢咧就似乎就好想同呢個 Iris 一齊，但係就唔俾佢知點解，亦都想佢即係閃婚啦，所謂做呢個行為啦。不過 Iris 呢一刻咧就推遲咗嚇。今節咧就比較短啊，咁我只係揾到一個字同大家分享啫。都係一啲比較淺嘅字，常見嘅 Sombrely 呢度講文中有講呢個 Iris 自己一個望住個山啊，望住個 valley 啊，望住啲樹啊咁樣 having somberly 咁望住 having or conveying a feeling of deep seriousness and sadness 好沉鬱嘅，嚴肅而憂鬱嘅，我會解讀做沉鬱啦咁樣。好，呢一節就完啦，下次再見。